that, I have not, I did not run my pastor through the paces or review every one of the sermons that he had made over the last 30 years.
Joe Watkins is the pastor of Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church in Philadelphia. He's also a Republican strategist and an MSNBC analyst. Reverend DeForest Soares is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in New Jersey. Gentlemen, appreciate both of you here today. Joe, let me start with you. He just said that he didn't vet his pastor, and yet we heard these stories about Reverend Wright being disinvited, if you will, when Barack Obama first announced, and that he was part of a private prayer with the family before Obama went out onto the public stage.
This isn't really the point, though. The point having to do with his judgment and whether or not he has the toughness to be the commander-in-chief is this.
But my question is, did he make a judgment, and did he vet him early? He's saying he didn't vet him, but did he make some sort of judgment call early on and say, I'm not going to bring this gentleman
Well, that's exactly right. That's the point. That's the point that's troubling to everybody, because if you want to be commander-in-chief of the United States of America, you've got to be tough. But let me tell you something. The leaders of countries that don't like the United States certainly are tough. And I know that some of the other people running for the presidency, I know John McCain is a tough guy. He's willing to make tough decisions. And I think Hillary Clinton is willing to make tough decisions as well. But Barack Obama has to show Americans that he's willing to make tough decisions. He could have made the decision early on to cut ties with Pastor Wright once these horrible statements were made public. He didn't do that. Instead, he made very kind comments. And I think Barack Obama is a very nice guy. I think he's a very nice guy. But at the end of the day, Americans now, especially those who are voting in the Democratic primaries in Indiana and North Carolina, are going to have to make the judgment, do we want a nice guy or do we want somebody who's willing to make tough decisions? Clearly, he did not make the tough decision he needed to make with regards to Reverend Wright.
Do you think he has now?
Well, now, of course, he has.
He didn't do it in time.
Now he has, but it's counterpunching. You can't be the heavyweight champion of the world as a counterpuncher. You've got to knock the other person out, and that's what he needed to do.
Let me bring in Reverend Soares here.
Well, he's a tough preacher, isn't he?
I know. That's why I want to.
And he's Lutheran.
That's why I want to give you some space. So Jeremiah Wright tried to explain his comments. He put them in the context of the African-American church experience, the religious experience, and essentially said the media and the people out there were watching all this, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't come out until now because I was letting them make a fool of themselves. People just don't get it. Is there something to that message?
Well, I think there's a tragic development here. We're talking about race, politics, and religion at the same time. All three are very legitimate discussions. All three need to be held, but they can't happen within the context of Barack Obama's campaign. Jeremiah Wright has the right to his religious views, and I think Barack tried to embrace that as a candidate. But I think Joe is right. His judgment is a legitimate question. He's going to be president. His ability to respond to challenge is a legitimate question.
And
if he can't deal with Pastor Wright, how can he deal with bin Laden? I mean, these are serious questions. However, the issue of vetting is both a political issue and a theological issue. And I think to the extent that Pastor Wright's theology found its way into Senator Barack Obama's politics, that's a problem. I was the Secretary of State of New Jersey while being a Baptist pastor, but my theology did not undermine my governor's politics, and I think that's the key.
Initially, in his speech on race, Barack Obama said, "I couldn't disown him much in the same way that I couldn't disown my own white grandmother." Right. Now it appears that he has made the break as strongly as he can make it.
He's become a threat now to his career.
Was that a political decision or a theological decision, a personal decision?
It was a personal decision in the first instance because Pastor Wright became an embarrassment publicly and challenged his integrity. And that's why I think Joe raises a very serious point about his judgment, because when your pastor challenges your integrity, it's easy to disown him. The question is, can you disown him when you hear controversial statements sitting in the pews as a parishioner that violate your core values?
He was a member there for 20 years. He heard a lot of these things. I'm guessing if he was listening, he heard all these kinds of statements over the course of 20 years. And so, you know what? At the end of the day, you have to question, was he sitting by and was he buying what the guy was saying when the guy was making terrible statements about the United States of America, when he's making terrible statements about
but statements which he says that he didn't hear. And actually, which my colleague Tamron Hall points out, having been a visitor to that church, she said, it is a mainstream church and that this is something that we know with some 8,000 parishioners there or something. And she said there's never been a buzz in Chicago about, oh, that crazy crazy reverend.
You and I know that there are people in our churches who trust us to pray with them, to do their funerals, who may not agree with all of our politics.
Of course.
But they don't perceive us as threats to their political careers, and that's the key. The mayor of our town has been a member of my church. The attorney general is a member of my church. We have people of diverse political views. Spiritually, someone can embrace me as pastor, while politically distancing themselves from me. Problem is, Pastor Wright was more than a pastor to Barack. He is a spiritual advisor, naming his first book. And I think that's a challenge for Barack.
All right, Reverend DeForest Soares and Joe Watkins, they're telling me that I've got to distance myself from this segment. I'm out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Monica.